Hi everyone, it's such a pleasure to contribute with the World Constitution Day, speaking a little bit about the principles of sports law in the Brazilian Constitution. But to explain how sport became a constitutional norm in Brazil, we shall go back to the beginning of the 20th century to explain a little bit about the development of sport worldwide. Sport, as you know, started to be organized, it started to be well developed in the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century with the International Olympic Committee. At this time, sport was kind of was basically practiced on an amateur basis, reuniting people that wanted to practice one or another sport. For example, people that wanted to play football, people that wanted to play baseball or cricket, whatever, they started to organize themselves into associations. And these associations were the core of the actual international federations. So at the very beginning, the first decade of the last decade of the 19th century and the first decade of the 20th century, a lot of international federations appeared, reuniting these people that loved sport and that wanted to promote sport through these organizations, through these associations, without a money revenue interest. But it did not take long to the governments, especially in turbulent post First World War era, to realize that sport would be a huge tool for government propaganda. And in this time, Soviet Union was forming around 1920s. United States was developing a huge program evolved into the Olympics. Great Britain as well was performing very well in the games, and the Olympic Games and all this system based on international federations, which we call today a pyramid, because the national federations support vertically an international federation that organize each sport. The government started to put money into these, to put resources into these, to use it as a very useful propaganda to their regimes. So the Soviets, for example, started to in 1925 to promote sport as a physical, as a cultural, as a healthy method, and in consequence, their athletes started to earn medals or to earn good results 2 decades later in the Olympic Games, thus resulting in a propaganda that Soviet regime was a better regime than the other countries that competed and lost against them in this sport. So, as you can see, in a very brief exposition, sport was a tool of government propaganda in the first half of 20th century. And Brazilian government, led by Getúlio Vargas, then dictator, in 1937, started to conceive a program dedicated to sport and dedicated to promote his regime through sport, of course. So, kind of 3 4 years later, at the beginning of Getulio dictatorship in 1941, the first rule governing sport was passed by him as a decree, and this decree created a council to overwatch sport nationwide. Getulio, of course, did not want to be viewed as someone that did not explore the propaganda inside the sport. So soon after the end of the Second World War, when Getulio was deposed, all of his regime, all of his legacy in the sport remained. So Brazil started to earn medals and to perform well in the Olympics. And sport that was a major passion in Brazil started to get well developed. I can say that in 1960s, 1970s, Brazil had a major football team, and football started to become the true passion of Brazilians. 2 world championships in 1958, 1962. Then again, the best player in the world, Pelé. And then again, the third championship in 1970, crowned football as the top level sport in Brazil, top popular sport in Brazil. Other sports, kind of athletics, volleyball, judo, etc., were relegated to a second level. That explains a little bit because Cuba and Argentina at that time had more medals than Brazil in the Olympics. And the first law passed by the Congress in Brazil regarding sport was a law dedicated to the football in 1976. Then again, in 1979, the government, again a dictatorship, reformed sport, extinguished the council that was the legacy of Getulio Vargas, the confederation that was the legacy of Getulio Vargas, and then at that time the national federations started to appear in Brazil. National Federation of Volleyball, National Federation of Basketball, National Federation of Football itself. So in the 80s, we had a major reform in sport and also a major reform politically. 1985, the military dictatorship that ruled the country was overthrown, and a new constitution was started to be drafted in the Congress, in an assembly, and in 1988 was passed the new Brazilian constitution, the actual Brazilian constitution, and sport was finally ranked as a constitutional right and as a constitutional duty of the government. So thus the sport was crowned as a norm of constitutional rank. And with this ranking came some principles regarding sport in Brazil, and these principles can be consolidated into some pillars. The first pillars, it represents the autonomy to the national federations regarding its organization and its function. The principle of autonomy. The principle of autonomy is easily explained when we see the context of that time. We had a government, a dictatorship overthrown. So sport in Brazil was starting to be aligned with the international principles, and the international principles rule state the autonomy to the federations, especially the federations linked to the International Olympic Committee. So what means that no political interference is allowed. Well, it's kind of utopic. We know we are seeing, for example, in 2021, the president of Belarus interfering in the Belarusian Olympic Committee directly, appointing his son. So it's something kind of uncontrollable. But it's a principle in Brazil, and the national federations inside Brazil, within the country, do enjoy a high level of autonomy without any political interference, at least clearly. Other principles that came with Brazilian Constitution were the principle that state has the duty to invest in sport, to develop educational sport, and in some circumstances the professional sport as well. And the professional sport, we can highlight the Olympic sport. And in Brazil we have some legislations trying to incentivize the Olympic sport. So the Constitution brought this duty to the state. The state has the duty to invest in sport, to put resources into sport, to help especially the development of educational sport. The other principle brought by Brazilian Constitution was the principle of the distinction between professional and amateur sport, which means government can treat in diversely, in different ways, amateur sport from professional sport. So government can the Congress can pass different laws incentivating the amateur sport, incentivating the tax exemption, for example, to parties that promote sport. So the Constitution allows that amateur sport can be treated differently than the professional sport. Another example that we can state as a principle inside the Constitution, inside the Brazilian Constitution, is the protection to the sport manifestations created in Brazil. We can see with this disposition that the sport is a part of Brazilian culture, and some sports can be treated in a special way, can have a special regime because they were created in the country. There is no example today of a regulation treating a Brazilian sport differently than an international sport, but it's a principle. The Congress has autonomy to do it. And to conclude, Brazilian Constitution brought the figure of a sports court. Sports court is kind of a tribunal dedicated to sport, a private tribunal. And sports court is a very Brazilian figure that was created in the beginning of the 80s, late 70s, beginning of the 80s, and was promoted in the Constitution to help to ensure the leisure, the respect to the competitions and its regulatory frameworks. So, sports court is a kind of a private tribunal that is dedicated to rule, to judge any disciplinary matter regarding competitions or regarding the game rules. These private tribunals, they are linked to their respective federations, their respective national federations. So each national federation shall have the competent sports court, sports tribunal. And in our constitution, we have a disposition in the Article 217 that states that the state court cannot judge any case regarding discipline and game rules involving sport before any sport court does it. Let's see again. First, a sport court shall judge any question regarding discipline and game rules. After a final decision is passed on a sport court, then state court has competence, has jurisdiction to decide this conflict if it is submitted to. So this is a principle that exempts the access, the free access, the universal access to Brazilian state courts, promoting first the sport court. As this disposition is on a constitutional rank, it does not conflict or derogate the free access, the principle of universal access existing in the Brazilian Constitution. So there are two dispositions regarding the access to state courts, one dedicated to sport in the Article 217. That's it. That was a brief exposition about the principles, the existing principles regarding governing sports law in the Brazilian Constitution. Remembering that Brazil is a federal country divided into three entities: union, states, and municipalities, and the three have legitimacy to regulate, to pass laws, to govern sport in parallel to the international and national federations, which in a para-estatal regime have the principle of autonomy to its organizations and function, and thus they can regulate sport as they do worldwide. Thank you very much.